you will still gain weight if you are eating too many calories. End of story. I wonder if they can hear that. Anna agrees. Welcome back to my channel, or if this is your first time here, welcome. Say for the other macronutrients is because protein is in sakes. Hi everybody, my name is Jackie Lindahl. I am a personal trainer and owner of Fit Like a Girl. If you have been on my channel before, welcome back. If this is the first time that you've been on my channel, welcome. So a couple of weeks ago on Instagram, on one of my stories, I got a question on how do I start tracking calories for weight loss. And I've had multiple questions in the past as well about why are calories important for weight loss, what role do they play, and why you should track calories in order for your weight loss goals. So I thought that I would make a video today on it to best explain it, basically as best as I possibly can. So here we go. So first questions first is we have to understand what a calorie is before we can understand why they play a role in weight. So first question, what is a calorie? Calorie is a unit of measurement that measures energy in a food. So when we're referring to a calorie in a food, whether it's an apple or a donut or whatever it is, we're referring to the amount of energy that food contains. So it's just a unit of energy, similar to a kilometer or a mile is a unit of measurement for distance. A calorie is a calorie, a kilometer is a kilometer, whether that kilometer is on sand or in the mountains or on a flat paved road, it's still a kilometer, just as 100 calories of a apple is the same amount of calories as 100 calories in a donut. Don't panic. I know some of you are going to be like, well, what about the energy content and what about the quality of it? We'll get to quality over quantity of calories later on. So the next question is, how do calories play a role in weight loss or weight gain? So we know that a calorie is a unit of energy, and basically think of calories as almost like currency for movement or your body functions. So you have to intake calories, intake energy for your body to be able to function. There's basic functions that require energy, even just things such as your heart beating, your breathing, those types of things. And obviously the more that we move, the more energy that we're going to need to be able to fulfill those movements. So that's the simplest explanation. There are many different systems and processes that your body goes through in order to convert the calories that you are intaking into glucose for energy. I'm not going to get into that. We're just going to keep it simple. Calories equal energy that our bodies need to run and to do things. Our body is in a constant process of taking our energy that we intake through food and calories into the ability to be able to move and different processes within the body. So now let's talk about calories for weight gain and weight loss and how that plays a role. So let's talk about what happens when we intake too much calories. So if you are intaking way too many calories for what your body is burning, also known as a calorie surplus, your body is going to take that extra energy and store it. So generally, unfortunately, the way that our bodies decide to store extra energy is in the form of body fat. Keeping in mind that this process does not happen overnight. If you intake too many calories one day and you are either at maintenance or less the other days, your body isn't necessarily going to store that extra energy and it's not going to show up overnight. We all know that we don't gain 30 pounds overnight. So this is usually occurring over a consistent period of time where you're consistently taking in too many calories for what your body burns, and over time your body starts to store that away as excess body fat. So now let's talk about what happens when we don't take enough energy in for our body's energy requirements throughout the day. So that is also known as a calorie deficit. So we are intaking less energy than what our body is putting out. So when this happens, our body has to revert to our stored energy sources, either ideally body fat or sometimes muscle, and we'll get to that later, for making up that energy deficit. So when our body needs that extra energy, it has to go somewhere to get that energy. So Ideally, like I said before, we want it to be that excess stored body fat and not extra muscle. But that is what happens in a calorie deficit, and that is how calorie deficits play a role in weight loss. So answering question number 2. Okay, so question number 3. Why do we have to track calories for weight loss? I just want to start out by saying you don't have to track calories, but the calories always count. Similar as if you don't look at your bank account and you're still spending money, you might still run out of money at the end of the month. Just because you're not looking at your bank account doesn't mean that that money isn't going anywhere. Similar to tracking calories, just because you're not tracking it and writing it down doesn't mean that the calories don't count. So that all being said, it is a good idea if you aren't sure why you're not losing weight, or you're struggling losing weight, or you have no idea where to start. It's not a bad idea to start just simply tracking what you eat. Similar, again, if we're going to revert back to our example of finances, just like tracking your finances gives you a good idea of how much you're actually spending, it's not a bad idea to at least just track what you're eating, bare minimum, to get a general idea of how much you're actually eating in a day. Because most people don't actually know how much they're eating in a day until they start to write it down, and that's how they start to realize it. There's a lot of critics out there that think that tracking calories is a very obsessive compulsive issue, and it can lead to further exacerbated eating disorder problems and things like that. I will go out and say, if you have a troubled relationship with food, if food to you leads to feelings of anxiety and things like that, and the idea of tracking calories makes that anxiety shoot through the roof, tracking calories is probably not for you. I would suggest working on your relationship with food first, seeking help for that, and then maybe you can look into that. But this is for the person who just isn't sure where they're going wrong when it comes to losing weight and just wants to gain more knowledge. So this would be for you. If you're wanting to start out by tracking calories, I would suggest doing it about 4 or 5 days a week, minimum. You don't have to do it every single day, but at least 4 to 5 days a week throughout your average day. I would include a weekend day in one of those 4 to 5 days a week, because a lot of times people will be really on track during the week and then fall off track on the weekend, or eat a bunch of calories, go on a bender and hit up McDonald's and drink all the beer and chicken wings and all these things, and then they have no idea why they're not losing weight. So I would definitely suggest keeping a weekend day in one of those. Let's talk about how to start tracking calories. And the first thing that I want to talk about in that is tracking apps. So there's many different apps out there. There's MyFitnessPal, there's Calorie King, there's tons out there when it comes to easy, convenient digital ways of being able to track calories. Now, keeping in mind that digital apps are to be taken with a bit of a grain of salt. They're not always 100% accurate, but they're usually pretty good. So it's a great way to start tracking calories. You can also just use a paper and pen. You can use Google. Anything that you can think of that you feel like will work well for you is a great place to start when it comes to tracking calories. Second question. How many calories do you need? So whether it's weight loss, weight gain, or just maintenance, it's good to figure out approximately how many calories you need. Bear in mind, each person is a little bit different, especially if you're using a tracking app and you go to whatever they use for their to figure out how many calories you're going to eat in a day. Bear in mind, take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. I find a lot of tracking apps usually put your calories as a little bit low because they want you to lose weight, thinking, oh my God, this tracking app is amazing. And so just bear in mind that if you do your calories in MyFitnessPal or something like that and it comes out with a low number, try it. But if you're finding that you're hungry, don't be afraid to bump it up. Next question, what do we track? There's a lot of information out there on the internet. Do you track macros? Do you track just calories? Do you track calories and macros? When I'm referring to macros, by the way, I'm referring to the macronutrients that food is made out of, your carbs, carbohydrates, protein, and fat. There's a lot of people who track macros out there and swear by it. It's essentially a way of tracking calories without doing calories. Instead, you're tracking the 3 main components that food is made out of. I like to keep it simple. So in my way of keeping it simple, I just track calories and I track protein. When it comes to carbs and fats, really it's just based on personal preference. There are people out there like me who love my bread, and I like a higher carbohydrate diet, but there are other people who prefer higher fat diets. Either one is fine as long as your calories are in check and your protein is in check. Why should we track protein over the other macronutrients? The reason why I want you to track protein over the other macronutrients is because protein plays a key role in muscle development and maintenance. So, like I mentioned before, when our bodies are in a calorie deficit, it will go to one of two places, either our body fat or our muscle, to make up the extra energy for the fuel for our bodies. Ideally, we don't want to lose our muscle mass. If we are losing our muscle mass and not our body fat, that leads to the dreaded skinny fat look that people don't like. So hence why you want to maintain your muscle mass so that your body is then going to take that extra fuel source from your body fat. So in doing that, you want to make sure that you are intaking enough protein, generally around 0.8 grams per pound of lean body weight, or pound of your goal weight. And the other thing that you should do is a little bit of resistance training to help train those muscles and keep those muscles maintained and strong. Next up, how do we actually track the calories? Let's talk about measuring food and recording. First things first, a lot of critics when it comes of tracking calories will talk about how you shouldn't have to track calories, you should be able to eat intuitively. Basically, eating intuitively just means that you know how much to eat based on your body, and you are very good at listening to your body and being able to eat proper portions for what your body requires. I will go off by saying a vast majority of people, I'm going to say high 80s to 90% of people, don't know how to eat intuitively, and they have to learn how to eat intuitively. There's a small portion of people out there who are very good at listening to their bodies and understanding what their body needs, and are able to just eat proper portions and be able to maintain their weight. That's fantastic for those people. But like I mentioned, for the vast majority of people, we are, especially in North America, not really able to actually listen to our bodies because we're so used to eating large portions. Take myself, for example. I have a very big appetite. I like to eat, and I am terrible at listening to my body. And it took a couple of years of tracking for me to learn how to eat intuitively. It took a couple of years of tracking my calories, tracking my protein, learning what works for me, my likes and dislikes, those types of things, to be able to accurately be able to eat intuitively while being able to maintain my body weight. So I understand why people who are critics of calorie tracking don't like the obsessiveness of it. And as I mentioned before, if you have a poor relationship with food, or the thought of calorie tracking makes you be very anxious, or brings a lot of anxiety around food, we need to address those problems first. That being said, learning how to track will teach you what your body needs for fuel, and it also teaches you how to eyeball a portion size. It took me a long time to be able to eyeball a proper portion size for protein, like even chicken, for myself, and it was because of tracking for a couple of years, on and off. I didn't do it for 2 years straight, 365 days a year. I did it on and off for a period of time, and then I would go back to tracking, and then I would stop tracking for a month or two. But it took that time for me to be able to learn those things so that I could go forward with being able to eyeball my food a little bit more accurately and be able to maintain my weight. So how do we actually start tracking food? I recommend measuring your food out, and there is a couple of different ways that you can measure the food out. Number one, measuring cups. Super easy, works really well. Everybody has these in their house. Works really well for things like vegetables, fats, and as well as for carbohydrates like rice and pasta and things like that. Sometimes they're not as accurate. You might find that a cup in one brand might not be the same as a cup in another brand, but overall, pretty good. The other one is a digital kitchen scale. So I picked this baby up years ago at Walmart for $14, and it works really well. I like to use it for measuring out protein, because it's easy to measure out protein on a kitchen scale versus this. I usually measure things out in grams, but if you're one of those crazy United States people, you can usually they have an ounce setting as well. So these are great. It literally would take me 20 seconds to be able to quickly measure out a portion of chicken, keep in mind a portion of chicken or beef or whatever might look different from one person to another. But let's just say 100 grams of chicken. Took me 10 seconds to be able to measure this out, put it on my plate. Worked really well. I liked it for meal prepping. As I would meal prep for the week, I would just measure out my chicken for 100 grams or whatever I needed, some days more, some days less, and I would just throw it in my meal prep container. It didn't take long at all. And with one of these guys, I would scoop out my rice or whatever I needed, and then I knew what I was eating throughout the day. What do I measure is the other question. So I generally recommend measuring out your proteins and carbohydrates, so whether that's rice or pasta, things like that, because what a portion of pasta is and versus what most people eat are two totally different things. I know for myself, I can eat an entire dinner plate full of spaghetti. I know full well that's probably at least 3, if not 4 actual portion sizes of spaghetti. And if you don't believe me, go look on the side of your spaghetti box and you're going to be very disappointed to find out how much a serving size of spaghetti actually is. Other things to measure are things like condiments, olive oils, and any other kind of oils that you're using for cooking. I would take these with a grain of salt. I find a lot of times people can get away really well with just measuring out their carbohydrates, their starchier carbs like pasta and rice, and their proteins, and do pretty well with that. But if you're still finding that you're having trouble with losing weight, then you need to start looking at things like condiments and additional oils and fats added to your dinners. So if you are using, say for example, olive oil for cooking, it's not a bad idea just to measure out and see what a tablespoon actually looks like and keep that in mind as you're tracking. Same thing with salad dressings. A lot of people will use a lot more than a cup of salad dressing, or a serving of salad dressing, which is usually about a tablespoon, not a cup. Don't eat a cup of salad dressing. That's a lot of salad dressing. Do you have to measure out veggies and fruits? I don't really think that you need to measure it out. You can generally eyeball veggies and fruits. Everybody knows about a fist is about a fistful of veggies is about a cup. And really, in my opinion, you can never go wrong with eating veggies. Generally, when it comes to fruit and things like that, you can I know MyFitnessPal, for example, has like medium-sized apple. Pretty generic medium-sized apple is like 100 calories, if that. So, that type of thing, I don't say that you'd have to measure it out. Generally, you can eyeball fruits and veggies pretty well. Last but not least, once you have all your measurements and things like that, it's good to record them. Whether you're using, again, a paper and pen, whether you're using Google, whether you're using MyFitnessPal or Calorie King or whatever else apps there are out there, record it. And like I said, you don't have to record every single day, but it's good to record as you go throughout the day so you're getting a general idea. And the other thing to keep in mind is you should record everything. So again, I'm talking about the bits and bytes. I'm bad for that too, going into the cupboard, grabbing a handful of chocolate chips and not recording it. But then I'll go to the cupboard 3 or 4 times in a night, and then before I know it, I've eaten half a bag of chocolate chips, but yet I haven't recorded it in my app. And then I'm wondering, why aren't I losing any body fat? Well, probably because last week alone, I ate about 600 or 700 calories in chocolate chips alone. So those bits, those bites, those handfuls, this and that, measure it out and just see. Again, it's just to give you a really good clarity on what you're actually eating in a day so that you can find where you might be going wrong if you're struggling to lose weight. Let's talk about one of the controversial subjects of calorie counting: quality and quantity. So I mentioned earlier that 100 calories of donut is equivalent to 100 calories of an apple. I am talking about calorie content. Just like I would talk about if you are running a mile in the sand is the same distance as running a mile on a flat pavement. It is the same distance. The difficulty, obviously, running a mile in the sand is harder versus running a mile on flat pavement, but the distance is still the same. Just like with 100 calories of donut is equivalent calorie-wise to 100 calories of an apple. Now, the quality of the calories does count. Let's talk about the donut is not a bad food. I refuse to talk about bad foods versus good foods, but a donut, for example, is less nutrient dense. It doesn't have the amount of vitamins and minerals and nutrients and things like that that an apple does. Just like pizza and salad. Obviously, there's more nutrients and things like that, vitamins, minerals, fiber in salad versus pizza, but it doesn't change the calorie content that is in there. The vitamin, mineral, carbohydrate, fat, protein content changes, but not the calorie. the reason why I wanted to touch on this is I am wanting to empower you with knowing that a calorie, yes, is a calorie. And if, for example, you have a day where you eat a Big Mac for lunch, it doesn't mean that you've thrown your progress out the window. Yeah, Big Mac probably isn't as nutrient dense as, let's say, salad with chicken and veggies and sweet potato. However, though, if you eat similar amounts of calories, because I think a Big Mac is like 500 to 600 calories, the calorie content is the same. So it's just to empower you, knowing that the calories at the end of the day are what matters most, and you can still make progress even if you're maybe sometimes, I'm talking sometimes, moderation, choosing less nutrient dense, less healthy foods. Obviously, it goes without saying, the majority of the time you should be thinking about the quality of your calories over the quantity. But also bear in mind that if you're eating too many calories, whether it is more nutrient dense, healthier food or less nutrient dense, unhealthier food, you will still gain weight if you are eating too many calories. End of story. So at the end of the day, moderation when it comes to the more higher calorie, less nutrient dense food like donuts and things like that, moderation is key at the end of the day. You could say your calorie deficit, for example, is 1,500 calories. I'm just using it as a general example. I'm not saying that you should eat 1,500 calories. This is just an example. Say that you're eating 1,500 calories. Obviously, if during the day you're eating 1,500 calories of donuts and pizza and Big Macs, your nutrient density of those foods aren't great. Yes, you'll still lose weight. However, though, you're not really looking at your protein. You're just kind of eating whatever. And the food quality won't make you feel as good if, say, for example, the majority of the time you're eating veggies, lean proteins, nice whole wheats, healthy carbohydrates, healthy fats, the majority of the time. Not saying that you can never have a day of, the pizza and donuts and Big Macs. Live a little in life, but at the same time, the majority of the time, you should be looking at the quality of your food. So let's talk about, last thing that I want to talk about is moderate versus severe calorie deficits. Now, there is this myth out there that some people will talk about starvation mode, and you'll hear your Aunt Tracy say something like, I was eating too few calories and that's why I couldn't lose weight, and now that I'm eating more calories, I am losing weight like crazy. It's because my body was in starvation mode. Starvation mode doesn't exist. Now, here's what I want to talk about when it comes to moderate versus severe calories. The reason why your Aunt Tracy wasn't losing weight in her severe calorie deficit was because she couldn't stick to it. So then she kept going off track and eating tons of food and say like that. This is what happens when people have a severe calorie deficit during the week and then they eat whatever they want on the weekends. They overeat and then now they're in a calorie surplus, and they do that every weekend and they wonder why they can't lose weight. A more moderate calorie deficit is generally the way to go. So it's better to go a little bit higher with your calories, but still in a calorie deficit for a longer period of time because you're able to actually stick to it. The reason why people who believe in starvation mode is because generally they're in a really severe calorie deficit and they're not sticking to it over a long period of time, or they stuck to it for a while, lost whatever amount of weight, and then found that it was just unattainable, and then they gained the weight back. So it's better to go a little bit moderate with your calorie deficit over severe. Starvation mode doesn't exist. If starvation mode existed, we wouldn't be worried about children in other countries who don't have food. We wouldn't be worried about people who have an eating disorder, because we'd be like, well, you're in starvation mode, so your body's just going to hold on to that extra fat. That doesn't exist. It's a myth, and I can understand how some people might believe in it, especially when your Aunt Tracy's constantly talking about this type of stuff, but it doesn't exist. You're better off going in a more moderate calorie deficit because you're going to be able to stick to it long term. Yeah, it might take longer to lose weight, but you're going to be able to stick to it versus a very severe calorie deficit that's pretty much unattainable to stick to in the long term. So, I hope that this answers any questions that people might have about calories, calorie deficits, why are calories important for weight loss or weight gain. And if you have any questions, I would love to hear them. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and maybe a follow, and share it with your friends, share it with your family. I really appreciate you guys watching this, and I hope to be doing more of these videos in the future. So if you really like this and you want to see more, please like this video and share it with your friends.